looks a little bit like have you noticed how the bass pops in every so many beats? Look, 1, 2, 3. On the fourth beat, bass. 2, 3. On the fourth beat, 2, 3. Bass. 2, 3. Bass. This is an arpeggio, the basic arpeggio present in romance that you have to master, and I recommend you master it separately. Work, in other words, your right hand first, and then you incorporate your left hand. Why? Because unlike pianists, I use pianists as a good example, who use their hands in total independence. In other words, they play one thing with the hand and do a total different melody with their left hand. In other words, they are like two different persons using one hand and the other. The guitar player works with the two hands working in conjunction in the production of a single sound. In other words, the two hands are synchronized to produce music. This is typical of the classical guitar. And the other characteristic of the classical guitar is that unlike the pianists who put both their palms, the palms of their hands facing upwards, classical guitars use the right hand with the palm facing upwards and the left hand with the palm of their hands facing downwards. In other words, their hands are inverted, and that generates a whole different setup for the neurons and the synapses that are created by your brain. This is so that you're aware. It's always important that you're aware of what you're really doing and how much is really happening as you are simply playing the guitar. Okay? Now, going forward, once you practice, and this is part of your work today until we move on to the next lesson tomorrow probably, you have to master your right hand fluidity for a few minutes, mounting them up with a metronome if possible, keeping rhythm steady, and most of all, and above all things, your sound must be regular, round, and of course, beautiful. Musicians are all about sound. Just as painters are about color, we are about sound. And sound must be beautiful, otherwise our music, no matter how fast or how sophisticated what we play is, if our sound is not beautiful, our music will not be beautiful. Therefore, your arpeggio must sound first and foremost beautiful. Once you keep it going, which takes a few minutes, I'm sure that by the end of the day, if you can mount up about an hour of practice, your arpeggio will get up to level, where it sounds very similar to this. Alright, now the next thing I want you guys to realize is that the arpeggio, although it sounds very evened out, it really is not. In other words, the first guitar is called the first guitar for a reason, and that reason is that it's leading the melody. It's taking a leading role in what the music performed is doing. Therefore, the sound it's producing ought to be in a way on top of the rest. So what I'm doing really is I'm adding a little accent on the first string, on the A finger, and the way I achieve that is by simply stiffening the A finger a little bit more than the rest of the fingers in the right hand. This, of course, requires a lot of attention and very slow work of your fingers as you begin your workout sessions. In other words, you want to think the A finger slightly more tense than the rest of the fingers in order to produce a louder sound. So we get the reason I do that is because the lead guitar is going to be leading the melody, which is going to be. And that melody must be always keeping center stage in my performance. Now, the traditional approach, but I would consider it the wrong approach if you do not use it wisely, is that the traditional school or the old-timers school that I've been, of course, also very much influenced by, uses the rest stroke to bring out notes, as if the right hand can only use the rest stroke to bring out notes, and that is a mistake, because every time you want to use the rest stroke, you must change the presentation of your right hand on the strings, and that's something you want to avoid at all costs, unless you're looking for a special effect, which, as the word says, ought to be used as something special, a special effect. Rest stroke in the contemporary classical guitar world is a special effect, and it's not overused or abused as it was back in the days when John Williams and Christopher Parkening and Andres Segovia were paving the way for us guitarists. So people like Carl Levaro, Jose Tomas, and the Romeros have introduced other ways of doing things with your hands, which of course don't disregard or look down on the past. On the contrary, we pretty much cherish it, but we complement it with the contemporary approaches, which also have a lot of wisdom attached to them. So the rest stroke, which is of course a viable option, would look at the same scenario doing something like. But of course, I've opted for the other approach, which keeps the right hand free. And of course, whenever you use the rest approach, what you're doing, you're stopping the string on top of it, and you're killing the sound altogether. That's why it's not always musically a wise option. And your decisions ought to always be, more than anything, musical. So when it comes to bringing out sounds, it's a matter more of anything than bringing more stiffening, a term which was coined by Abel Carlevaro, and he called it in Spanish fijación, which means fixation. Imagine that you're using like a calf, or you're bending, you're stiffening your finger in a way that it's not as flexible as, say, the other two fingers. And so becoming more stiff, it produces a more protruding sound. That's my approach, and that's the approach I propose to you. So once you get this arpeggio going with the first string protruding, then you start working with your left hand. So our right hand, just look at it, it's always kept very much relaxed in this fashion. There is no tension whatsoever. My body, as I was pointing to you, is kept balanced by one leg up and one leg backward pushing forward. My guitar is well placed, there's no tension in my lower back. My forearm rests on the guitar. The guitar is well placed facing forward and upwards with the cushion I use on my leg. And now I introduce my left hand, my stopping apparatus here on the fingerboard. The same approach for the left hand. Same relaxed state, just as this one, but with the palm facing downwards. My fingers ought to be always relaxed like that. The thumb is hidden behind the fingerboard, and classical guitarists very seldom show you the face of their thumb on the top part of the fingerboard, because typically when they do that, they're either trying to relax or they're using their thumb for some special effect. But normally, their left-hand thumb is invisible to the people watching them from the front. I am the only one who sees the thumb because I'm looking at my hand from above. Now, the hand is relaxed in this position, and that's the way you ought to keep it in your, so to say, relaxed mode. Now, what the left hand does, it stops, it makes the strings shorter or longer depending where you stop the string, so you make the sounds higher or lower depending on where you stop. The first string is named E, or Mi in Spanish, or in Latin-speaking countries. Italian, of course, is one of them. And E is the name of the first string, and just so that you know, it's the same name as the sixth string. The first and the sixth string have the same name. They're both called E. And that's why when you play them both together, they both sound in unison like a big E. They go well together because they are the same note. Only that one is much lower and one is much higher. You will discover that Romance, the piece we're playing, has even a higher one down here on the 12th fret, which is also an E, and it's here. So you have very high E, a middle E, and a very low E. Okay? So what you do, you start off with a B. And B is on the first string on the 7th fret. You keep your hand very relaxed, and the only finger that applies a little pressure is finger 4. Unlike your right hand where you call the fingers by their name, on the left hand you call the fingers by their number. The index finger is finger 1, the middle finger is finger 2, the A finger is finger 3, and the 4th finger is the little finger is finger 4. So you use finger 4 to stop the B on the first string with a little pressure, just enough pressure to squeeze the string on the 7th fret without applying more than enough pressure. In other words, your thumb is not to be used to squeeze, just as an opposing thumb. In other words, gives you a sense of direction, a sense of equilibrium to the left hand, and it's not meant to squeeze. Only very seldom does your thumb participate in the squeezing, but it ought to be used very seldom. Otherwise, you're going to be mounting up tension and you're never going to be able to play fluently, fast, or in a way which is relaxed. And when you're not relaxed, you're going to sound stiff or tense. And you want to avoid that at all costs. Now, stopping the B is just what I said, squeezing softly the first string on the 7th fret. And as you do that, you perform the whole arpeggio sequence with the right hand. Please look and observe how relaxed I look. I'm really not feeling more tension than the little tension it requires to stop the beat. My right hand is totally in its neutral, totally relaxed position, and everything in my left hand is totally relaxed with the exception of the little finger, finger 4. So tension must always be checked. You must perform a tension check every few seconds. Just check, am I relaxed? Yes. Do I feel tension anywhere on my body? Yes. Then compensate for it by annulling it. So again, little tension in finger 4 to press on the B, and then you will notice that the only scenarios where tension will build up is when you start pushing yourself in order to play faster than you can. In other words, if you want to play this faster, like you're gonna feel so pushed to do it that you're probably gonna stiffen up your upper torso, you're gonna stiffen your right hand, you're gonna stiffen your left hand, and you're gonna start playing tension. So remove speed, play at a speed where tension is totally taken care of, and you can perform everything without any tension and any mistake to show up. So you play very slowly, keeping sound always as your main goal. You want a clean sound. And today's goal, what you have to achieve by the end of today, is to play the first sequence of Romance like I'm showing you, with no tension, with this clarity of sound, with the first string protruding above all other strings, and with the evenness of sound that I've shown you from the beginning. So this is your objective for today, and I'm going to do it for you. I'll do it once again. I want to show you something so that you realize the difference between one approach and the other. By simply changing the angle of attack, the angle of attack means the way I attack the strings. If at a right angle, if at a 45 degrees angle, that's what I refer to when I say the angle of attack. Depending on slight changes on the angle of attack and to the placing of my right hand around and on the sound hole, that's where and how I generate the type of sound that I produce. In other words, playing here is where I perform and I can get the sound that I'm producing. Changing the angle of attack slightly would produce a different sound. Check it out. Look. simply changing this angle. This is one tool that we musicians use, just like painters don't only have green, they have different shades of green. We guitarists have different shades of sound to play with. Therefore, you do realize now how important the angle of attack is when performing and how you must keep it. So one thing I invite you to do is that as you perform your arpeggio, you also introduce your right hand to different angles of attack so that you can introduce your hand to different sounds. So you can and ought to be trying to produce both and both things ought to be performed by you without any effort. And of course, the only effort that I'm going to be requesting that you implement is your time and your patience in achieving the goal. I think we have it pretty much nailed out. I'll resume it in a nutshell. Sitting position is very important. The left leg goes up, the right leg goes a little bit backward to even out the tension in the lower back part of your body, so as you don't get to suffer from lower back pain. The guitarist plays at an angle, pointing forward and upward a little bit, so that the head of the guitar is never too far, so you don't have to reach out to play notes. They're kind of in the neighborhood all the time. Your hands must rest very relaxed, both on the right side and on the left side. Both the fingers are relaxed, and they only get to work when you're playing notes. And remember, sound is king. We musicians are all about sound. And your objective for the end of today until the next lesson, which probably will be either later on today, depends on my schedule, which I will check later on, or tomorrow. Nevertheless, you will still find the lesson here on my channel. And I invite you, of course, to subscribe. And of course, you can find all the accompanying material of what I'm doing on my website, mangore.com. Mangore is the name of the most famous Paraguayan musician. I'm here from Paraguay. And mangore.com is my website, mangore.com. And you'll find the score, the videos for this piece for Romance online. They're all free of charge, so you can benefit from them at no charge. Of course, you can also subscribe and access the rest of the transcriptions that I offer at an annual subscription, and I invite you to do that as well. But for the end of today, you ought to be able to play Romance, both as a very sweet melody and as a more poignant metallic melody. So again, I'll show you. This flexibility that I'm showing you, I want you guys to acquire, because only a fraction of guitarists in the world have it mastered out. And the sooner you incorporate it in your technique, the better it is. Therefore, you'll see that our workbench, Romance, is the perfect scenario to introduce classical guitar technique and, of course, a very beautiful piece of music. I'll see you guys later today or tomorrow. And I thank you, and may God bless you all. Thank you for your company. Bye-bye.